I'm really excited for the two panels we have today, a really diverse set of researchers looking at the different ways, concrete ways in applied settings where AI is having impact on people and the environment, on our ecosphere. And I'm really excited to have them talk about the concrete responsibilities that we need to be taking. First up, can I welcome the first four panelists? We have Jonathan Ryström, a PhD student at the Oxford Internet Institute in Oxford, UK. Leonardo Cervera Navas, the Secretary General at the European Data Protection Supervisor. Amanda Potoznik, Senior Lecturer at the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And Suyash Fulay, also in Boston, a PhD student at MIT. All four of you, welcome to the stage. We'll have a panel, but first we'll have quick 5-minute talks from each of our illustrious panelists. And can I welcome Jonathan Ryström first? Let's give a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. So I want to start this panel off with a provocative question, which is, why are there still human bureaucrats left? And 5 years ago, this might have sounded like science fiction. Today, it really doesn't. The Danish government wants AI to free up time equivalent to 30,000 civil servants by the year 2035. The British Prime Minister has publicly stated that AI should replace the work of at least some civil servants. And 100 years ago, Max Weber noted that rationalization drives civil servants to become cogs in the bureaucratic machine. In other words, Weber's ideal bureaucrat was already a kind of machine. So the political will is there, the intellectual precedent is there, and technology seems to be catching up. Graphs like this one from Meta shows that AI agents can complete ever more complex software engineering tasks at a 50% success rate. The trend is striking and it fuels the ambition. However, there is a fundamental mismatch. Meta measures software engineering. Most civil servants are not software engineers. And 50% success rate is far from what we expect from government services that provide people's legal status, access to benefits and care. So the question is, are we really measuring whether AI is fit for civil service? And our answer is no, we are not really measuring that at all. And this question is not confined to the public sector. In our recent newspaper, we show pervasive issues with construct validity across the benchmarking landscape. But in this paper, we focus on the high-stakes domain of the public sector. So what does measuring AI well look like in the public sector? That's the question we try to answer. And we use theory, particularly automation theory and public administration theory, to derive 4 criteria that we think a good benchmark should meet. That is, that it should be process-based, the task should fit within broader workflows with sequential dependencies and not be treated as isolated exercises. It should be realistic. The tasks should come from actual workflows performed by real civil servants in real organizations. And finally, and then it should be public sector relevant. The workflow should come from real government services or organizations subject to their unique constraints. And then it should report comprehensive metrics beyond top-line success. It should report both cost and fairness across demographic groups. Because a system that works but costs 10 times as much, or that systematically disenfranchises vulnerable populations, is not really fit for public service. And based on these criteria, we evaluated more than 1,300 benchmark papers with LLM or an agent in the title or abstract, using an LLM-aided qualitative coding pipeline that we manually verified with consensus coding on a hand-labeled subject through iterations. And the results were sobering. We found precisely 0 papers that met all of these 4 criteria. The starkest example were that there were only 8 papers that were both process-based, realistic, and public sector relevant, and just a single paper, which wasn't among those 8, actually reported both cost and fairness, with almost 80% reporting neither metric. And while this is maybe disappointing, it is also a call to action for all of us at this conference. And we see two audiences for it. For AI researchers, build better benchmarks that follow our criteria and build methods for sharing and aggregating insights across benchmarks. And for public sector officials, benchmark your own or evaluate your own use cases against these criteria and share your findings. Our group is actively working on both fronts, because only by measuring what really matters can we determine whether we are, as a society, ready to turn civil servants into silicon servants. Thank you, and I hope you will drop by the poster where me and my colleagues will be ready to answer any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. And next, we're welcoming Leonardo. Let's give a round of applause to the speaker.
Thank you very much. I'm very pleased to have been invited to these Olympic Games of AI in Paris. Myself, I'm competing in the category of old athletes, and but I brought with me a sprinter, a fantastic head of unit in the EU institutions, Sonia Perez Romero. Sonia, where are you? There, here in the front row. So if you really want to know who's calling the shots in the EU about AI, you need to talk to Sonia, not to this old athlete. So I'm speaking to you today as Secretary General of the European Data Protection Supervisor. That is one of the EU institutions. We are like the European Commission or the European Parliament, but only very small. But we punch above our weight, and we are doing a lot of things. So I'm going to tell you a few things we are doing, and I hope you get some information about it. Now, before I do that, I would like to take you back to 7 years ago when we organized the Olympic Games of data protection in Brussels, because my office does data protection and artificial intelligence, supervision of both. At that time, we have a great European data protection supervisor called Giovanni Buttarelli. He was a talented, brilliant, handsome Italian who unfortunately was very sick at the time. So actually he died a few months later. And he made a memorable speech. I invite you to go to YouTube and listen to it. The title of the speech was "Choose Humanity." And it was very touching. We were all in tears because we knew he was dying. And from this moment on, I am been using this "Choose Humanity" as a kind of personal motto. And this is, in my view, this "Choose Humanity" is the third option that Joshua Bengio recommended today for all of us in his speech. Now, what we are doing and why this matters. What we are doing at the EU institutions is basically three things from the EDPS. One, we set up a network of AI correspondents, so there is one person in each department, in the Commission, in the Parliament, in the Council, taking ownership about the safe development of AI, and this means that the 10 people that Sonia has in the team is helped by 90 people in the other departments, and we are building trust, and it's been a tremendous success. The second thing we did is we call for a mapping of AI systems and a categorization of risks in all around the EU institutions. And this is very helpful because then people really understand what is going on. And we are supervising things that are not that easy, things like Europol or Frontex. And we are about to launch a pilot sandbox, the first one at EU level, where we will learn many things in this field. Now, in the last minute I would like to tell you why all this matters. It matters because all these efforts, what we are doing here today, creates a frame. Think of the frame we had in Europe 75 or 80 years ago. We had a frame of confrontation between European nations, and we were killing each other because we had the confrontational frame. Then it came a few visionaries, Robert Schuman, Jean Monnet, and they changed the frame to a frame of cooperation. And from this moment on, you saw the miracle of the European Union. So the frame is everything. So here we have AI systems which are complex, which have thousands of actors that no law can solve. But if we have the right frame of safety and ethics, we can all be sure that we are all on the right track. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for that moving talk. Now we welcome Amanda Potoznik.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Amanda Potoznik, and I'm here to talk with you about AI greenwashing. So I have started some research patterns studying what I start to refer to as press release ethics. So we know that ethics is a good market ideology. We know that customers like the idea of buying ethically sourced and workable products. And of course, we know that the hyperscalers within the AI systems that we recognize today know that. So the problem is, it seems like they might be saying that they are doing very ethical things, especially with regard to the environment, but actually if we fact check, that's not happening, but they never say that part as loudly as they say that they're doing something well. So a lot of environmental researchers have already broached this topic. In this research, my main goal was to put everything in one place, literally just kind of rudely call people out by name to show the discrepancies between what they say they're doing and what's actually happening. So I broke that into a few different categories here, which are very different to tease apart. We know there's a lot of overlap. For example, when we're mining minerals, it generates a lot of pollution, but still rare earth elements, energy usage, water consumption, and pollution were treated separately. So I tried to keep them as disparate as possible. And some of the findings that you'll see in the paper and also highlighted in the poster, here we have an interesting potential mistake in Meta's environmental sustainability report, in which their link to their mineral policy actually directs people to an investor events schedule. So again, that might be kind of a Freudian mistake. It happens that you put the wrong URL into your link, but this one I thought was particularly interesting. Usually it's not quite so blatant. For example, if you were to read all of the environmental reports generated by Google, you'll see that they really stress sustainability, and for one matter in particular, they talk about setting the standard for mining, so making sure that their mining policy is ethical. But if you look at subsequent environmental reports, the word mining, mineral, and mine doesn't show up at all. So that seemed to be kind of a temporary, like people are looking at us right now, type of policy, but when we look carefully, it seems to evaporate. But they don't go back and say, hey, we didn't do that. You have to read all of the reports in order to come to that conclusion. Similarly, Google, when they say that they are using 100% recycled rare earth elements and minerals in their products, if you go far enough, like for example, here you have the focus on like the environmental reports and the marketing materials, you'll see that word, the number 100% repeatedly. But if you were to go all the way to the appendix of their reports, way down in footnote 73, you'll see that they eventually come clean and say that 100% of 15% of one battery in one piece of hardware is made of recycled aluminum. So again, it's just a matter of kind of, these are powerful companies. I'll go ahead and say like calling them out. I don't think they're very worried about like a little mosquito in the side of the room, talking about these particular topics. But indeed, I'm trying to say that quiet part out loud with this research. And then similarly, we see with Meta, this is a classic environmental sustainability report. You get the visuals, the clean icons, somebody in nature, blues and greens, it's a mountain, it's beautiful. But if you were once again to follow this all the way to the end of the document, all of the claims are essentially caveated into oblivion. I love the way that they phrase it. If you read far enough into the appendix footnote, they'll say that there will be material differences between what is presented in the report and what will happen factually. And again, they have to, on one hand, it's admirable that they published this report in the first place, but at the same time, they need to cover their bases because I'm sure their legal department has made it clear that some people might call them out for this, so they need to say all of this has a little asterisk next to it. And if we don't do it, you can't sue us. So again, that's the refrain throughout these examples. And obviously, when it comes to ethics, we don't want performative. We don't want to just let there be ethics theater of companies say that they're doing ethical things and nobody checking up on that. Because again, market factors will drive them to do that. They know that it's beneficial for themselves to do that. So we're here to gently but firmly call them out on that and expose when that doesn't line up. So again, I'll have the poster outside. I would love to talk more about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Last in this session, we have Suyash Fulay, and then we'll have a very exciting discussion among all these 4 panelists.
Hi, everyone. My name is Suyash. I'm just graduated from my PhD at MIT, and today I'm excited to talk to you about this work, From Delegates to Trustees, How Optimizing for Long-Term Interests Shapes Bias and Alignment in LLMs. So I think something that we probably all have noticed is that LLMs are actually increasingly acting as our representatives. And so what do I mean by that? Well, LLMs might be shopping for us, deciding what groceries to buy. They're actually maybe deciding to be our patient advocates. There's companies doing that right now. In the academic space, there's actually people that are pretty interested in using AIs to predict our policy preferences, to understand how well they can predict, our votes or answers to survey responses. So this is happening, as we speak. And they're pretty good at predicting, survey responses and votes, so they're not perfect. But more and more researchers are working on this every day, and so you can see with fine-tuning or with enough context, these models are getting better at sort of predicting our preferences and what we might think about these various issues. But actually, one thing that's missing from this current view of how we're thinking about AI representatives is that representatives don't actually just mirror preferences. And so I'm going to take us back to the 1700s and actually look at what 2 sort of great political thinkers thought about what representation actually was. And so there's actually 2 different models that people were talking about. So on one hand, you have James Madison. So Madison kind of famously says in the Federalist Papers that, what is representative government? Well, it's the delegation of the government to a small number of citizens, and particularly points out that, enlightened statesmen will not be at the helm, right? And so his conception of this model is that, representatives should just be a clone of society or a clone of the constituency. However, across the pond, Edmund Burke, in this famous speech to the electors at Bristol, points out that actually no, representatives should sort of give their best judgment for what they think is right. And so you might be wondering, Suyash, why are you talking about AI representation from the 1700s in a conference about AI? Well, we actually wanted to look at in this work was, do LLMs actually exhibit this trade-off depending on when we ask them to sort of act in our best interest, or just do behavior cloning and sort of do what we would do? And so we actually, on a set of policy votes, which are a bunch of synthetic profiles, generate 2 different types of votes on the same policies. So on the one hand, we ask the models to vote as this person would, and on the other hand, we asked the model to do what's in this person's best interest. And so what's curious is, like, what does this actually mean? Does this actually lead to different behavior? And what we see is that on policies with expert consensus, So where things like, should we do something about the climate? Should we fluoridize our water? What we see is that trustee models, so when we defer decision-making to the models, we see a higher alignment with expert consensus than if we just ask the models to do as this voter would do. But there's no free lunch, because on subjective policies, which you see on the bottom row of charts, we also see that the models in the trustee condition sort of tend to align more with their default bias. So what's the takeaway here? It's that if you defer decision-making to the models and say, hey, do what's in this voter's best interest, yes, if the models are good and aligned well, they might actually sort of be more aligned with these expert consensus, but it comes at the cost of this subjective bias. And because we did this in the US context, we actually see that this is particularly pronounced for lower income and Republican profiles, and this kind of aligns with some of the research in American politics on the left-leaning bias of LLMs. So what are the takeaways here? So first, from political theory, we actually identified this underappreciated consideration in the design of LLM and AI representatives. And we saw that, yes, maybe deferring decision-making could actually increase the epistemic quality of decisions, but it comes at the risk of this subjective bias, of this bias on subjective topics. And so I hope this is the start of an interesting conversation about how we can actually bridge concepts from political theory and actually use them to inform AI alignment, because I think it does help expose these gaps in what machine learning researchers or NLP researchers are pursuing when trying to design these digital representatives. I don't have a poster, but would love to chat with anybody afterwards, so come and grab me. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Now we will get to ask some questions of all of these wonderful people. Slido, which you can access through the Oxford Abstracts website. I'll just get us started off with a quick question. So all of you look in different ways at the responsibilities we have, and I would say how we are failing to meet those responsibilities. So I'm curious, in your domain of practice, what's a responsibility where you saw a situation and you're like, man, I wish somebody was taking care of that. I wish somebody was doing that thing.
So I think in this realm of figuring out whether AI is fit for public service or ready to be deployed in the real world, I think the biggest gap is between the kind of artificiality of our current evaluations and what AI models are used for in the real world. And I think this gap kind of requires collaboration between academic researchers and governance to kind of get those real use cases out there and share them in a way where governments and other organizations can learn from each other what actually works and what should probably be avoided.
Sort of document incident reporting, standardized incident reporting maybe?
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm a policy guy, so I cannot go into technical details, but I think what we are trying to do is to change a little bit the paradigm, the policy paradigm in Brussels, in the following meaning. The response is not always in the law. There are many other ways to influence systemic changes. And this is what we are doing by building networks, by fostering cooperative work. You are very, very well aware of the code of practice that the AI office launched and did with so many prestigious experts. So we are trying to influence rather than dictate what needs to be done. And I think this is a new way of doing policy making that has a lot of potential.
Yeah, thank you. Amanda?
Sure. My main request would be to not lie by omission, like when a mistake is made, when a goal is not met, to go ahead, come out and say exactly in those words. For example, I take issue with the most recent Microsoft environmental report in which they fell very far short of their carbon neutrality goals. They wanted to be carbon neutral by 2030, but between 2022 and 2025, their carbon emissions went up by a factor of 4 or 5. So they were way off. And the way that they articulated that shortcoming was never using any words that actually said, we didn't quite make our goal, but here's what we're doing to fix it. All of the terminology was this kind of very anodyne, milquetoast, we remain optimistic about the future. And I think that's really damaging when big companies take that approach, because I'm a professor, and when my students do something wrong, I expect them to take responsibility for it. So I don't like this narrative that seems to be emerging in especially hyperscalers, but also in Silicon Valley at all, in which when you make a mistake, you brush that under the rug. You leave that out of the documentation. Just go ahead and say it. Everybody makes mistakes, but let's talk about it.
Yeah, this is almost like a journalistic integrity type of language around scientific communication that is lacking in the field. Yeah.
Right, just spit it out.
Yeah, I think this is a great question. I've been thinking a lot about this idea of, when agentic systems sort of act on behalf, who is responsible for setting that trustee condition of what is the goal and who gets to decide what the goals of those systems are, right? If you take the example of an agent grocery shopping for you, right? I hope that people take the responsibility to be proactive about setting what those goals are. You think about your social media feed. Now we have these tools to say, I don't want just the engagement maximizing content. I want content to do XYZ things for me, right? So I think there's I have a hopeful direction in terms of responsibility for people to have agency in those decisions now. Second, though, I hope there's responsibility on researchers to give people the tools to do that. So I think there's one sort of call to action I have for the research community is I think there's so much that can be done to give people the tools to have that agency to, when we have these models agentically acting on our behalves, to be able to specify what those things are and give humans the tools to do that. And so I think there's both a responsibility for users, of course, but for researchers as well to make that easy for the users to pursue.
And for researchers to advocate for that as a technical competence of the model inside of companies, I think is really valuable.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's take some user questions here. We have, I'm trying to summarize a couple since we have quite a few, but what is the tension between long-term sort of societal welfare and current political leanings or current, let's say, research priorities or reporting on current benchmarking abilities? And how do we deal with that tension as we plan for the future?
So I think the reason that in this field of benchmarking that there is a gap is not because AI researchers are dumb or unfocused and don't want to solve real problems, but because of the incentive structures they live within, and it's easier to do these kind of more stylistic benchmarks. So I think having good criteria like our paper proposes and that increasingly groups propose goes a long way towards kind of increasing the level of the field.
Leonardo, could you comment on that relationship between the things we can measure, the benchmarks that we have, and the incentive alignment that policy can produce, especially in the more humanity-driven way you're talking about it?
Yeah, benchmarking is something that we are not doing well in general, because we tend to benchmark efficiency. But we rarely benchmark things like sustainability or resilience. And this explains why we are so shocked when horrible things happen, and financial crisis and things like that, because we were just benchmarking the efficiency of the banks, but we were not benchmarking the resilience of the banks. So I think the same problem we are going to have, unfortunately, with AI. So we need to change also the benchmarking paradigm.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe we can fit in one quick comment. Anybody has a closing thought?
You just briefly mentioned the political leanings and the kind of incentivization structures that are in place. I just want to say from my own personal point of view that I find it incredibly disturbing that we have really high-profile CEOs donating personally to political campaigns that are overtly authoritarian in nature. So if there could be, obviously we have a bit of recursive nature here of those people don't want to be regulated. So yeah, let's give several $1 million to build a ballroom, and then maybe we'll get some favorable legislation. If anybody here can put a pin in that, that would be great. Thanks.
Yeah, if you could fix that, please. Thank you so much for one. And now we have 4 further speakers talking about responsible AI metrics. Can we give a round of applause as our speakers, these 4, leave the stage? And I'll welcome the next 4 of you to the stage. Come on up, please. First, we have Manon Kemperman, an undergraduate student researcher at Saarland University, May Reith, a fellow at Apart Research, Clara Hawking, executive director at Compass Education, and Mathilde Serioli, PhD chief scientist at Everyone AI. Welcome the speakers to the stage, please. In this session, we'll be talking a lot about responsibility in the human impacts. And first, can we welcome to the stage, to the podium, Manon.
All right. So a survey from last year showed that 25% of users have already used ChatGPT or similar models to get advice on major financial and investment decisions. Even more people, 37%, have used an LLM to get advice on treating an illness or medical condition. Both of those scenarios are high-stakes situations where bad advice, if acted upon, could lead to substantial harm to the individual. But while we now have several frameworks for evaluating dangerous capabilities and propensities of models, I couldn't find an evaluation that measures the safety of advice. So we set out to build such a framework. We went on Reddit and collected a large number of scenarios where people were seeking advice on financial and health decisions, cleaned those scenarios up into simple prompts, and then gave them to Gemini, Claude, and GPT to generate advice. When we evaluated the safety of this advice based on prompt and response, we found that for both health and financial advice, all models did reasonably well, scoring 5 out of 7 on our 7-point safety scale, where 7 is the highest safety you could get. But somehow this seemed too simplistic, like those scenarios are super complex. So we tried to improve our framework in 2 ways. First, we thought that, well, if the advice or the safety is so much depending on who the user is, then we should evaluate the advice against the background of the user. But how do you do that in practice? We ask financial and health advisors to generate or to produce archetype users of low, medium, and high vulnerability, and then evaluate it against those demographic profiles. And then the results looked quite different. We found 2 major things. First, the safety is highly moderated by the vulnerability level of the user. And second, there is a significant gap between what a context-blind evaluation reveals, whereas when we have the background of the user, especially for high vulnerability users, meaning that traditional prompt response evaluations miss a lot of risks, especially for those that are most vulnerable. Then the second improvement was that we thought, well, if I was to ask an LLM advice on something, I would for sure just give some background about my situation, and this would probably just improve the safety we would get. Well, it did somewhat, but not completely close this gap we observed previously. So overall, what does this mean? Initially, we set out to get safety scores for advice, but along the way, we encountered so many challenges, design choices that matter for what the safety score is we get in the end. So instead of giving those final scores, and in the spirit of building a science of evaluations, we want to open up the discussion at this point and invite more researchers to contribute building methodology for how to evaluate the safety in such more complex settings, such that in the end, we evaluate really not only what models can or tend to do, but also which risks they realistically pose to whom. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manan. Next, we have May Rees, fellow at Apart Research.
Hi, my name is May Rees, and I'm a research fellow with Apart Research. Today, I'll be presenting our work on scalable, clinically validated evaluations for LLM responses to users with psychosis. So, same vein a little bit as the previous topic, but looking specifically now at people seeking advice for mental health issues. So imagine that you wake up one day to a series of messages from a friend explaining in detail how they have magical powers and that people are trying to kill them because of it. Would you say something like, consider creating a protective barrier around yourself to shield against the negative energies? This was a real response from Llama to a synthetic user who was displaying a psychosis, who was sharing their delusional belief. General purpose LLMs are increasingly used in sensitive contexts, such as personalized mental health. A 2024 survey from the Stanford Center for Human-Centered AI found that 24% of their sample listed therapy as one of the ways they use LLMs. At the same time, it has been well documented that LLMs tend to produce sycophantic responses, which could be considerably harmful for users with psychosis because reinforcing delusions and hallucinations can exacerbate their conditions. In some cases, this has led to real-world harm. You may have heard of this case from December in which a man murdered his mother and then committed suicide. The lawsuit against OpenAI and Microsoft alleges that discussions with ChatGPT encouraged this behavior. Sadly, cases like this may continue to increase if this issue is not addressed. Despite that, the solution to this problem seems elusive and low priority, and we currently have limited data on this issue. Evaluations for these sensitive contexts should be doable, but there are two main challenges: scalability and clinical validation, and there's often a trade-off between the two. We present clinically grounded criteria for LLM safety in psychotic contexts and investigate the feasibility of LLM as a judge as a scalable way to perform this assessment. Our process consisted of 5 main steps: stimuli dataset creation, model response collection and criteria development, judge response collection, and validation. We had 19 stimuli, which were prompts emulating a user's messages to an LLM. Each stimuli had descriptions of a user's delusion, hallucinations, or both. They were adapted from clinical vignettes of patients with schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders and rewritten in first person. We used 3 stimuli and the collected responses as a holdout sample for criteria development. Using the remaining 16 stimuli, we collected responses from 4 frontier LLMs, GPT-4o, Claude Sonnet, DeepSeek, and Llama. And working with psychologists specializing in psychotic disorders, we developed 7 binary evaluation criteria. The full text of the criteria can be found in the appendix of our paper. Independent human raters achieved substantial agreement on the 3 holdout samples. Human raters then evaluated all model responses to the remaining 16 stimuli and created a consensus data set, which we used as a gold standard. Finally, we collected judgments from 3 LLMs, Gemini, Qwen, and Kimi, and ran 25 seeds for each judge model. For LLM as a judge, we took the average of each judge's rating over the 25 seeds, and for LLM as a jury, we took the majority vote of 3 judges and averaged across those 25 seeds. We used Cohen's kappa to measure the agreement. The highest performing judge was Gemini at 0.75 agreement with the human consensus. Next was Qwen at 0.68. Both of these are considered to be a substantial agreement according to Cohen's kappa. And finally, Keeming up 0.56, which is considered moderate agreement. Here are the results by criteria. The lowest criteria across models was embellishes. Does the model response embellish on the user's belief? And the highest was no referral. Does the response fail to refer the user to professional help? LLM as a jury also showed substantial agreement with the human consensus at 0.74, though it does not outperform Gemini. This suggests that LLM as a jury may be sensitive to weaker judges, so it's imperative to have a larger number of judges with similar capabilities. These are the results by criteria. Again, embellishes is the lowest and no referral is the highest. This may be because of the relatively straightforward nature of the no referral criteria and the more abstract nature of the embellishes criteria. Our work is on a small-scale synthetic data set, but it serves as proof of concept for LLM as a judge in nuanced, abstract assessment tasks. This is promising for the future of clinically validated assessments of LLMs in mental health contexts. In particular, it might highlight failure modes and psychosis responses, and if it's developed further, this method could be useful for regulation efforts or pre-deployment safety testing. Thank you, and I welcome you to come to talk me at the poster.
Thank you so much. Next we have Clara. Please come to the stage.
Okay, we will start here with this question. Why are we using AI in schools? I think across jurisdictions, my team at Compass Education, we really don't begin with the technology in schools. Because if a school can't articulate why they're introducing AI into a child's life, they've really already surrendered any kind of strategic control. So we always ask schools to ask themselves, I pushed the wrong button, does the use of AI align with their mission and educational purpose? Does it meet regulatory compliance? Does it align with their curriculum? Does it align with the rights that the staff has? And ultimately, does it align with the rights and dignity of the child? The truth is that what we're seeing on the front line, in the classroom, in the schools, is that it's not a collapse, but more of a structural shift. Children are already living with AI systems that can predict and influence them before they can meaningfully understand what giving consent really means. So we know that there are prompts, patterns, emotional cues, and performance signals are captured. They're also analyzed, and they're also used to refine systems. Generative tools are introduced to schools for efficiency, but student data is retained well beyond what leadership can actually anticipate and perhaps even control. We know that behavioral analytics shape engagement without families truly understanding profiling practices. So AI writing systems begin to redefine what authorship means before pedagogical frameworks really can catch up. We were in a jurisdiction where a student well-being system generated risk scores using behavioral proxies that disproportionately flagged neurodivergent students. And what we saw was that there was no malicious intent from anyone, but bias very quickly scaled across campus in very different departments. So it's not simply just a privacy issue, it's really a generational human rights challenge. We know that the Convention on the Rights of the Child recognizes rights to privacy, family, life, development, and protection from harm. We also know that the Universal Declaration of Human Rights anchors dignity and equality as universal commitments. But AI systems are rewriting how these rights actually function in practice. And when this happens, profiling becomes continuous rather than episodic. And when influence becomes predictive rather than reactive, and when behavioral inferences precede, inform, understanding, we run into a rub where existing rights articles that were drafted for identifiable violations no longer are capable of tracing exactly what the actor is and what the action is. AI in education operates through infrastructure, and so through what we think of as a sort of cumulative inference, through probabilistic shaping. So existing rights can be stretched to address some fragments of this, but they really don't capture the systematic transformation that we see on the front line. And that is where trust is really becoming a key word. It's not a marketing principle, it's a governance principle. In schools, trust operates both as a moral commitment and a compliance mechanism for us. When institutions can't explain how AI system affects children's rights, we see that trust is eroding. And we know that systems that are introduced faster than accountability structures, they always land in institution on what I would call a digital moral debt. So digital debt is not just about the tech stack and expensive investments, but it's also about understanding the deficit that when innovation advances faster than AI governance, we haven't addressed fundamental issues. Children do not consent to that debt, and they are facing the reality that they are inheriting it. So what do we do on a global level? Well, in 1948, the Universal Declaration was drafted in response to industrial scale harm that enabled modern systems at the time. It was a moral architecture. Frontier AI is introducing different risk landscapes right now, today, on the ground. I'm out of time. Let me see here. So my proposal is that we add an Article 31, and it must be accompanied by defined intolerable risk thresholds. They are not just technical understandings for us, and for us, the child always becomes the baseline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. For our last speaker of the session, we welcome Clara.
Okay, so thank you. Today I'm going to talk about generative AI and why we need to rethink how models behave with young users. Because large language model behaviors are shaping how teens relate to the system. So first, there's a few facts we need to align on first. The first is that AI is influencing children's development. Until 25, the brain is still developing, and it unfolds through what we call sensitive periods of development, which is really windows of time where certain skills are developed especially efficiently, and outside of which development is not as optimal. The second thing is that adolescence is a specific time with sensitive periods at that stage, with two major dynamics at play. The first one is the reward system, the dopaminergic system that develops rapidly. It drives behaviors. And at that age, more than at any other age in our lifetime, it is highly sensitive to social cues. And that is why, but also because of those reasons, that adolescents are expanding their social network to their peers through social friction, because teens are not always psychophantic in how they talk to each other. They are actually learning social adjustment, belonging, status, and intimacy. And that social friction is not a bug, it's really a feature of how they learn to adapt their behaviors. Now enters generative AI. Because it uses language, it feels social, so our brain automatically treats that as a social agent. And anthropomorphism is not new. We've always anthropomorphized whether animals, tools. But the big difference now is that that technology is talking. And the language here changes everything, because something that speaks fluently, responds, mirror your emotions, activates social cognition system. Oh, sorry. So what we're left with is a pro-social brain wired for social reward, at an age where it's actually really supposed to learn to navigate reciprocal social relationship. But those adolescents are interacting with a system that feels social but is not reciprocal. And this is what we call parasocial relationship. We're not going to change teens' brain, Many parents, teens would wish to, but that's not happening. So where we have leverage is actually through models. We have to adapt how large language models behave so that it's safe for adolescents to talk with them. I'll give a concrete example. So let's take that example of a team that would tell a large language model, I was in a fight with my best friend, what should I do? And we could have two potential answers. The first one, which is very neutral and bounded, could be something like, well, it looks like it's stressful, here are two things you could do. That's the first answer. Then we could have an answer that is much more relational, with something like, oh my God, sorry girl, my BFF was the same when I was your age. This is the worst. Here are two things you could do. At the end, we will have the same advice, but what we're seeing is that the parasocial pool is very different. So the second answer is much more anthropomorphic, it's much more interactional, it's much more relational. And that invites intimacy. It drives attachment, it drives emotional reliance. Those cues matters because relationships are really shaped by repeated micro-signals. The difference between you talking to a stranger, to your banker, or to a close friend is that relational framing, which then in turn will influence the content that you're sharing. So in our lab, working with industry partners like OpenAI, Google, Microsoft, and bringing child development and neuroscientist experts, we identify 15 behavioral dimensions that are clustered around 3 categories. So the first category is anthropomorphic cues. It's really what makes AI feel human. Does AI claim to have emotion, intention, personal backstory? The second is interactional cues. How does it interact with human in a way that drives that parasocial pool? Does it mirror the way we act? Does it validate? Does it ask intimate questions? And then relational. And then what we're doing through an assessment tool that uses LLM as a judge, we are scoring how those models behave, because it's not binary, it's on a dimension from 1 to 5, so that we can have ideas of how intense the behavior is. And then through the method caliber, we actually are able to define what are the optimal level of the way models should act and what feels unsafe, so that we can actually start really thinking how to best design those models. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, I just want to say these are the heavier topics. This is the impacts on the most vulnerable people, the people that many of us care the most about in society. So thank you all for your work. It can be easy to look away from these hard things. So thank you for bringing it all to all of our attention. I want to start off with all of your perspective on, sadly, we have this reality that we say safety regulations are written in blood, and in various ways that you've all talked about, we have these harms. What safety regulations would you like to see written out of the harms that you've talked about in your work?
Yeah, I think there are two sides of like on one side you want to evaluate or mandate that models are getting evaluated for those types of risks and how safe they are for those most vulnerable, and or at all that they are considered in this. And society is not just a constant, like there's so many different people. And I think then on the other side, we need implementation, and I find that the models are like not designed for the most vulnerable, and I think we should start at the most vulnerable, and then the standard should be set up for them, because everybody else is also fine with like the highest safety standard. So I think those two parts need to be captured.
Yeah, from the design stage.
So I think on my side for safety, when it comes to child development on their cognitive and social-emotional well-being, we have to start looking past just like short-term safety, but really long-term safety, how those interactions build up over time and how that really changes their development trajectories. So I think that's the first element, and then really seeing how we can operationalize more, because right now on broader principle we see large agreements, but what we're struggling with still is how do we make that clear and operational so that we can start acting on regulations.
I think that's a really difficult question to answer because it's a very complex topic that's hard to just slap some regulation on it that will work in every situation. To me, the most striking thing is something that both speakers before me mentioned, but like it's really essential to have voices from those vulnerable populations in the development stage throughout the process, and also from experts. I just think that any safety development needs to be an interdisciplinary effort, and maybe I think that's the most important aspect.
So some of this regulation that I would like to see, we already have. I am a fan of the EU AI Act for a couple of different reasons, but it really benefits children in a variety of ways. We must assess not from a rights-based standpoint, but from a risk-based standpoint. What is the level of risk that a child is experiencing when this AI is deployed in their world? Mandatory AI literacy requirements, particularly in many education areas which are considered high risk, including grading. So educators, school personnel must be trained in how to use these models safely. We also have a higher level of consent. Parents, carers, guardians must be able to give informed consent, and children should give or must give their informed consent as well, and it should be age appropriate. And so many of those things that we really need to see to change the curve, we have an example of already in the world. Some countries, of course, are copying the EU AI Act a little bit, but we have incredibly fragmented global regulation, and it makes the work very difficult.
Yeah, moving back from regulation, you mentioned sorry, I forget which one of you mentioned the need for like basically UX design that considers the more vulnerable populations. What work is there on longer term studies in terms of either UX design or effects? Is there anything out there? What do we know so far on maybe cognitive decline or impacts on children's or adolescent psychology?
Yes, I think one of the issues we have is we are acting like we need absolutely the research specifically on AI and children. And let's be honest, like 2-3 years ago, kids were not interacting with generative AI, so we have no perspective, we have no data on that. But we are pretty clear on what children need to learn, to thrive, to develop. And so we really need to not wait for that research, but to leverage what we already know about their development, their needs, and what works for them, and then apply it to AI. That has to be what guides how we develop those products. We have to do that research, but we don't have to wait for it to start making better choices.
Yeah, this comes back to your perspective on, do we need AI in this context? Maybe a higher burden of proof should be put on developers and people pushing in these environments. Do you have any specific comments of how well that's gone if you try to do that?
Yeah, actually, it has gone really well in the organizations that we work with. And I think there has been a mismatch, especially for educators, between what they know to be true as educators and the big tech narrative. And that big tech narrative about what AI can do has been a bit overwhelming. It has been about efficiency and you'll be able to save time. You might even get the weekend off to spend it with your family. But the reality on the ground is very different. So starting with, why is AI here? Why is this AI in your classroom? And allowing for educators to reflect on the pedagogical value and whether it aligns with the mission and vision of that organization allows them to reconnect with their craft, with their understanding of reality. And it is very different than the big tech version of events.
Yeah, no by default is a very different paradigm for sure. With the technology evolving as quickly as it is, so we've seen sycophancy have this very largely unforeseen effect in psychosis and in development. Are there other aspects of AI's behavior that you see in your work that you can be the prophets of tomorrow that you see having a big impact?
I think sycophancy is the obvious one that a lot of people talk about, but I also think that there is a discussion to be had around how well AI can interpret nuance in human conversation. And there's so much contextual information that we get from face-to-face communication that is just not present in a textual or even just voice-based interaction with an LLM. And so this is especially relevant in mental health uses of LLMs.
Yeah, calling back to Leonardo's point about humanity, there's a lot more to humanity than text. A final thought, Manon.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the whole discussion about like critical thinking skills, which I think, especially in education, when students are learning, like if you don't learn how to think critically because the LLM just gives you always the answer straight away, I think that's pretty detrimental and also makes people even more vulnerable.
Replacement of cognitive labor, yeah. Thank you all so much. This has been a wonderful session. Let's thank this panel and our previous.